Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks.
This week we share a juice with Hannah Cramer. We talked to Hannah about living with an ostomy and how the world could be more accessible for people with ostomies, emergency surgery versus elective surgeries, how her disease influenced her career choices, and how to cope with trauma and post-surgery fears. Cheers.
Hi, everybody. It's Robin.
And it's Alicia. Welcome to Bowel Moments. And today we are very excitedly joined by Hannah Cramer. So Hannah, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Welcome,
I'm so happy to be here.
Yay. Before we ask you to tell us your story, because that is going to be question number one, just to give you a heads up, we're going to ask you, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking grape juice. That's what sounded good to me.
I love it. I love grape juice like so very much. Although I'm a old school grape Kool-Aid, I want it to taste kind of fake. That's my jam right there. No pun intended.
I can't do grape juice. I can't do fruit juices. The pouch doesn't like them. It makes me so sad.
That's very sad. Robin, what are you drinking today?
I can't drink fruit juice, but I can drink bourbon.
Well, that's not fruit.
I'm drinking bourbon, and I probably haven't had bourbon since college. So that's 20 some odd plus lots of years ago. Yeah. So let's just see how we devolve. Everything is going to just go downhill with the bourbon.
I think we're going to get spicy Robin later. We're going to get spicy Robin, and it's going to be great. I am drinking a Sauvignon Blanc today from a little family winery called Huya, which makes biodynamic organic wines. And so this is my plug for Huya Vineyards if you're ever down in New Zealand, because it's delicious. But
I am drinking Woodford Reserve.
Ooh, I like
Distiller Select Woodford Reserve.
Now that we've established that we're all drinking, drinking our various respective drinks, tell us your story, how you came to join this IBD community.
So I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was a junior in high school. I had been having stomach aches for a while, bathroom urgency, but it took a while to get diagnosed because I think a lot of doctors didn't really take me seriously. Finally got diagnosed in 2017, which was very exciting to finally have an answer. I started my first biologic 3 months later, I think because they had waited to diagnose me for so long. My disease was basically started out as moderate. I never really had a mild season. So I was on a biologic within 3 months, and I've been on biologics since then. I had a bowel resection in 2014, the summer before my senior year of college. And I had been having some really bad pain, and I was terrified of surgery, but I ended up having surgery, being in remission, living a very amazing life for many years. And then last year, I got some scar tissue at that location. And so I went in for a bowel resection to cut out the scar tissue, and I ended up having a complication, and the anastomosis opened. And so I had some sepsis. I went septic. I never know the right verb to describe sepsis, but there was sepsis in my body. And I ended up having emergency surgery and waking up with an ileostomy. So now I have a temporary ileostomy. The plan was to reverse it in 3 months. I ended up having another complication. They found a mass on my ovary in November. Luckily, it was not a mass. When they actually went in, it was just a pocket of fluid. So they fixed that, but it pushed back my reversal date because I was then recovering again. And then by the time I was cleared to have the reversal, I realized that I actually can live with this. And I was kind of tired of being in the hospital and having surgeries. So even though I could reverse this, I have not done it yet. And maybe I'll do it in January 2023, or maybe I won't. But right now I'm living a happy life with my ileostomy.
I love that you said that you could reverse it and you're making the decision not to. But I also have a question. So we've had a couple of people on talk about surgery, and I've shared extensively about my surgery experience. When I had my first surgery 20 plus years ago, I had a temporary ileostomy, but I say choice, but it's just, I knew in advance. I knew in advance that I was going to wake up from surgery with an ileostomy. And then even when I had surgery December of 2020, I knew in advance I was going to wake up with a temporary ileostomy. So what was that like, waking up with an ostomy, an unexpected ostomy?
So it was shocking. Whenever you have a bowel resection, they tell you that there's a chance, something could go wrong and you could wake up with an ostomy. So when I had my first resection in 2014, the first thing I said when I woke up was, do I have an ostomy? Same thing when I had my second resection. And then same thing when I had this emergency surgery. And, the answer was always no until this time it was yes. And I was just shocked. I mean, I knew that it was a chance, but I didn't really think it was going to happen. I also didn't really know anything about ostomies. I was always scared to have one. So I was shocked and I was honestly devastated. And I think one thing I told my parents was, don't tell anyone that I have this, because I was embarrassed about it. And I think that was because there's just such a stigma around it, within like 5 hours later, I posted about it on Facebook, and now I talk about it on Instagram all the time. So that was short-lived, but waking up with it was shocking and devastating.
I can only imagine.
Well, and I love that you're so open about this on social media, because you celebrate having an ostomy. Like just the other day, you posted about being able to go out to lunch and having a longer lunch experience that was unbothered by other types of complications. And so I'm curious, what type of response have you gotten from folks? Do you have people now reaching out to you that maybe are sharing their stories, or what's been the reaction to that?
I've gotten really positive feedback by sharing things. And, some of it is like, oh, you're so strong. I wouldn't be able to do that. And some of it is like, I share some of the struggles, like with insurance and with getting supplies and staying hydrated, and people respond and they're like, I can't believe you have to deal with that. And so I think those have been the best responses for when it's eye-opening for people about, because a lot of these struggles are things that just IBD patients face, even without the ostomy. I think it's just a little bit worse. It is worse with the ostomy because now there's a medical appliance. So there's additional complications and supplies. But I think that's been the best response, is people saying, I had no idea that ostomy supplies went through insurance, which I didn't know either until I had to order them through insurance. If I run out of a bag, I can't go to Walgreens. So, things like that. I think it's been nice, like educating people and feeling the support when people hear the struggle.
I can see that. And yeah, I would imagine that if you never really had to deal with an ostomy, why would you know that there's no ostomy supplies at Walgreens? It's Walgreens,
Mm-hmm.
They have everything. They have crutches at Walgreens. Why wouldn't they have ostomy bags? But they're so personalized, I think. Yes, insurance struggles are universal, unfortunately. In the United States, for all of you listeners outside of the United States, it is tough. The insurance companies are tough to deal with in the United States. So not sponsored by, clearly.
Well, and then there's like an additional thing with ostomy supplies, because you don't get them from the insurance, you get them from a manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
So I never dealt with a manufacturer. Like, I've been on a biologic for 10 years, but I never dealt with the manufacturer of the biologic. I got it from my insurance.
Right.
Now I deal with the manufacturer who deals with the insurance. So that's just a third party of lack of communication abilities and all that fun stuff.
Yes.
I will add too. So anybody that has an ostomy or is about to get an ostomy, reach out to the ostomy supply companies and get samples. They will send you samples of different types of bags, different types of flanges, 2 pieces, 1 pieces, ones that you can empty, ones you can't. Like, I really, as somebody who's had an ostomy twice, 20 years apart, I really suggest that you take a little bit of time and try out different types of ostomy bags to see what works best with you, what sticks, what adheres the best. Do you need a paste? Do you need a wafer? Like, there's so much to go into it. So if you are on the cusp of having an ostomy, reach out to those ostomy supply companies. They will send you samples and answer your questions too. So that is just a little side note from somebody who's had an ostomy a couple of times and could very well have an ostomy again. Who knows?
So as somebody who has not had an ostomy, you said a couple of things that perhaps our audience may not be familiar with. So you said flange, and can you explain what these terms mean, just in case people need to know?
Do you want to do it, Hannah?
I think you should, because I actually don't know what part of it is a flange.
Okay.
So educate me too.
So an ostomy bag has the pouch part, and then it has the part that sticks to your skin. And so the part that sticks to your skin is the flange, and then the bag is the bag. But I prefer a 2-piece ostomy. And so it's almost like having a Tupperware bowl where you stick the flange on your skin, and then you close the ostomy bag onto the flange, just like you're putting a lid on a storage container. So that is, the flange is the part that sticks to your skin, and then the bag pouch. A wafer is it looks like a little donut, and it's like sticky, and you can put it on between the flange and your skin to help it stick. There's also a paste that's super sticky that you can put between the flange and your skin to help it stick. Nice. I will say this too about ostomy supplies. I thought in December of 2020, going in to get an ostomy, I thought to myself naively, it's been 20 years. There must have been advances in ostomy. There's no advances. Well, that's a lie. There is one advance. Instead of having a clip to close my ostomy bag, it's like plastic Velcro. So I don't have to have a separate clip. That is the only advance in ostomy supplies in 20 years. So scientists, there's an opportunity.
I was gonna say, I feel like a business. I feel business ideas coming on from this. Maybe we'll workshop this later.
You should, because when I was first getting my ostomy, or when I first had my ileostomy, I'm recovering from surgery and could really not bend very well. So my mom was helping me put them on at first. And she was like, I can't believe just like the technology and how great these things are. And I'm like, this is a bag with tape and it doesn't even stick and it leaks all the time. There is nothing scientifically great about this.
No. Nothing. Thank you for saying it.
Now that I know how to put it on right, I mean, I still have leaks. But now I'm like, this is cool, but I definitely wouldn't say this is like the best piece of scientific technology I've ever used.
Listen.
Agreed. 100% agreed.
I'm gonna tuck this away. I know some scientists, Robin. We know some scientists. I think maybe we can work on this, and then we'll get it branded. It'll say bowel moments on it. It'll be great.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I love it. I would wear
it. We'll get you one as soon as possible. You're going to be first on the list. I'm curious what your criteria would be in deciding whether this is something you want to stay with longer term or whether you're going to decide to go into surgery. Like kind of what's in your brain as it relates to like, this is the milestone I need to reach in order to make a decision.
So I realized about 2 days after waking up with the ileostomy that I had never realized how anxious I was about finding the nearest bathroom and running to the bathroom until that was no longer an issue. So that's a huge pro for keeping the ostomy is I don't have urgency because I have a bathroom connected to my stomach. A con is just the supplies are really expensive, maintaining the supplies, changing the bag. And I've had a hard time staying hydrated because I learned that your large intestine is what absorbs fluids. But since I don't use my large intestine anymore, I'm having to get IV infusions of just saline bags or just having to be more mindful, which is why I'm not having an alcoholic beverage. I'm having grape juice. Not that I think grape juice is going to help with hydration, but alcohol certainly doesn't.
I was going to say it's better than bourbon, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think though the biggest one is that I'm just afraid to have surgery again. Like I went in for a bowel resection, which I had before. So I wasn't afraid at all. I went in feeling really positive, not worried at all about the surgery. I was healing well. And then 10 days later, I felt like I was dying. And then I was healing from that surgery and then same thing with the ovary. So I'm just afraid of a surgery complication. And I think that's the biggest thing is if I can work through that between now and then, or if I can't.
Yeah. Well, and you're not the only person that's had that revelation of like, I didn't realize that I was compromising my life in this way until I didn't have to. And so I think, one of our past guests, Stacy, was really open on her social media about how freeing having an ostomy was for her as well. And sort of now post-surgery, how she's had to kind of re-gauge her life and things like that. So certainly we've talked to other people that, yeah, this was a good move. And I think that's what I find so fascinating about surgery and talking to folks with IBD is it feels like it, and we've pushed our doctors on this too a couple of times when we've had them on there, is like, it becomes this thing that's really scary and like thing of last resort. But majority of the people are really, really happy afterwards with the results and feel a lot better or feel a lot freer and less anxious sort of with it. Robin's the exception, unfortunately, on that one, but she's the exception on a lot of things. So
I think that we normalize, maybe not just IBD patients, but people with chronic illness normalize all of that, right? This is just how my life is. This is just, I have to go to the bathroom this many times. I have to not eat these foods. So then when we have surgery and have an ostomy and realize that you really do get your life back, it's so empowering. You want to run out and do everything.
Hannah, one of the things that I am super impressed by is not only that you completed law school, congratulations, that's hard, but also that you have chosen to go down a very different path than a lot of lawyers that I know who decided that they really wanted to make money. I'm guessing that's probably not what happens at the legal aid clinic. So I want you to talk about going to law school with IBD, because that is hard, but also I want you to talk about why did you choose this particular path? I'm curious if your IBD had anything to do with your choice in the type of clients you work with.
Yeah. So my IBD 100% had to do with the type of law that I wanted to do. I went to law school actually wanting to do medical malpractice because I wanted to sue the type of doctors that took 3 years to diagnose me, to be completely honest. And then in like the second week of law school, I learned that you can't really do that in Texas. So I had to do a small pivot. And I've always been like just passionate about disability rights, like even as a child before I had IBD. But I just remember I struggled a lot getting diagnosed, and I had 2 parents who were very outspoken and educated. We had private health insurance. We had a lot of privileges, or I was very privileged, and I still had a hell of a time. So it was important to me to help people so that other people didn't have such a rough time. That's why I wanted to do disability rights work. And I did some clinics during law school and met some amazing attorneys who work for legal aid. And I just was in awe of them and thought, okay, these are my people, even though they didn't really know me. I was just a law student, but I was like, this is where I belong. This is where I can do the work. And so I applied there, and that's where I've been since I graduated, or since I passed the bar.
So talk to us a little bit more about specifically what you do.
So I work for legal aid. So we serve low income Texans. And I specifically do disability rights work. So guardianship, kind like the best way to describe it is helping people like Britney Spears, except with way less means. Special education, getting accommodations for kids in school. And then I also do some employment. So employment discrimination and other areas of employment law. That's awesome. So yeah, the nice thing about a huge law firm is that we do a lot of areas of law. So I've been able to, instead of just having to pick one specific area, I've been able to do like all areas of disability rights, which has been really nice.
It's super fascinating. That's actually one of the reasons why I went into political social work, was for that same reason, is that I think the sort of macro level trying to make systemic change is really impactful. And so that's, but I started out with exactly the same thing where I was just super pissed off about disability rights. And I'm like, I'm going to change it. I don't know if I'm doing that, but I'm making small changes. Perhaps maybe that's,
I don't know if I'm making any changes, but I sleep well at night. So
you are changing a lot of people's lives. Like by doing what you're doing, you're changing a lot of people's lives, and you're probably helping a lot of people that wouldn't know where to turn otherwise. And like you said, maybe don't have the means to be able to hire a lawyer to do this on their own. So I think that's really fantastic. So we do this questionnaire for people ahead of time. So we've been open about that. On your questionnaire, you talked about how you have really noticed that, and speaking of accessibility and rights, that the world could be very different and much friendlier to people living with ostomies and other types of disabilities. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I got this ileostomy in the middle of the pandemic. We were working from home. So it was very easy to change a bag or check my bag or worry about my bag because I was just in the comfort of my home. But as we were going back to the office, I got really bad anxiety about what am I going to do if my bag leaks? What clothes am I going to wear? Professional clothes don't really fit, or I haven't figured out how they fit. And, I was very nervous about that. And I started going back into the office, and I had a leak. And it was the first time that I was going to have to change it in public. And there wasn't really a place for me to do it. We have a big bathroom, and there is an area for breastfeeding. I think it's for breastfeeding, but, people hadn't been in the office for 2 years, so it wasn't really cleaned out or used for that. So I had to talk to somebody about, creating a space for me to do that. I did end up using the handicap stall, and that worked, but it made me just think, there's not really a physical space for me. I have to have someone create it. And then I had my first in-person hearing since before the pandemic. So on top of just going back into a real courtroom that made me nervous, I was now I'm going back with an ostomy bag. So, where mine is, it's very high up, so you can pretty much always see it under my shirt. And also, I have Crohn's disease, so it's not like I can go 3 hours without emptying the bag. I'm having to attend to the bag every hour, hour and a half, 2 hours at the most. So I had this hearing scheduled for 4 hours, and I was like, how am I going to tell the judge that I need a potty break? So, that was something I had to think through. And I thought, maybe there's another lawyer with an ostomy bag that I can ask and see if they have some advice of how to do this. So I tried to find a lawyer with an ostomy bag. My mom tried, some of my mentors tried, my supervisor at work, who's also a mentor and friend, tried. Nobody could find another lawyer with an ostomy who could talk to me. So to me, that means that there's not really a space in this profession for people with medical devices or different abilities, or they're embarrassed because of the stigma, so they just suffer in silence.
Yeah, that's mind-boggling to think that you couldn't find anybody that was more open about that, and to have to make those concessions, I think is challenging. Wow.
And even as somebody that has had an ostomy, I had my ileostomy again during the pandemic, so didn't really have to leave my house too much. But 20 years ago, I did have a leak at work, and I actually had to leave work and go home and change. There was no place for me to change at work. So this time I didn't have to think about it, but 20 years ago, I would have had to leave work to go and change my ostomy. That's what I had to do.
One thing I didn't realize is I'm pretty good friends with my supervisor. And so I had told her that I was nervous about this, and she was very supportive. And so when I ended up having my first leak, I forget what she said, but she didn't realize that when your bag leaks, you have to change the bag. Like there's not really a Band-Aid to put on it. And it made me realize, I don't really know that much about ostomies. I didn't know what the flange was, but even having an ostomy, I use all these phrases and people don't know what I'm talking about. So, and that could be part of the accessibility issue is I say I need a place to change my bag, and people may think, well, do you need a toilet to empty it in? Or do you need a place to sit down with a trash can? I guess people don't really know what it means and what we need, and therefore they can't or don't provide it.
I'm glad you said that, because I was about to say, what would you need? What would make something accessible to you to do what you need to do to change your bag?
I need a mirror in front of me, because I still haven't figured out how to do it without a mirror. And I see Robin is shaking her head, so that makes me feel more normal.
No, for a whole year, I had it for a year. The first time I had it, I always needed a mirror. Never not. Does that go together?
So that makes me feel better.
Always needed a mirror, always. And I will give you a tip. Do you use any kind of paste to help your ostomy?
I use barrier rings and I use paste.
So if you have a leak and it's a small leak, or you catch it early, TMI, just pull your ostomy, the sticky part, the flange away, and clean that small area. Add some paste in as close as you can get to it, and then hold it with your hand to have the heat to make it stick, and you will repair the leak without having to change your bag.
Ooh,
that's a good trick.
Hot tips by Robin.
Yeah, I'll have to try that. I don't know if I could successfully do that, because I would probably end up pulling the whole thing off by accident, but that's a good thing to know to try.
Don't use wet wipes or anything like that. You have to just use water and a paper towel, because you don't want to put any kind of film that'll make your skin not want to adhere. So just use water, napkin, paper towel, whatever. But that's the best way that I've fixed leaks and not had to change the whole bag.
So what I need when I change it is a counter space to lay out my supplies and kind of make the bag. I cut out the hole, I put the barrier ring on top of it, and then I put the paste on top of it. And then I need a private area. I don't want to be in the main bathroom, because I'm going to take the bag off and clean around it. And it's a stoma, it's a piece of my intestine. I feel like other people don't need to see that. And so I feel like it would be so helpful if inside of maybe the handicap bathroom, there was a mirror. And actually, I was at a Starbucks recently, not sponsored by, they didn't pay me anything, but there was for diaper changing.
Diaper changing. Yeah.
It was amazing. I just pulled the diaper changing station out, and I used that. And then I used the mirror, and it was such a comfortable space. So that's what I would say is using a baby changing thing, whatever they're called, and then a mirror. And then I think that would make a bathroom very accessible for an ostomy.
Nice. That makes sense. I was going to ask whether that would be helpful as just something like a baby changer. I guess it would be, how clean are they is definitely one thing. And I also didn't realize that every time you change your bag, you have to cut the hole and do the things, it's not just ready to go. I guess I assumed it's ready to go.
Well, I'm going to jump in real fast, Hannah, because there are ones that you don't have to cut. So it just depends on what you like to use.
Got it.
So I used one that I didn't have to cut. I could form it with my hands.
I have one that I have to cut to my size of the stoma, because that's the other thing is everyone's stoma is a different size. So it could be that there's bags that are my size that I don't know about, or I don't know, but I cut mine to my size. I usually pre-cut 3 or 4 at a time. And then when I use the fourth one, I pre-cut 3 or 4 more just to shave a few seconds off. Cause it does add up time, because after you make the bag, when you take the current bag off, you have to clean around, clean the skin and all that. And then if there was any irritation, which is something that I've dealt with, you have to treat it with a soak. So sometimes it takes 20 minutes of putting a soaked gauze around the stoma to treat the skin. And so, the bag just kind of sits there waiting while you treat the skin. And so that takes time too.
Wow. Well, and that adds even another layer of accessibility, especially as it relates to your job. Like you're in the middle of a trial, you've got a 20-minute bathroom break or less, probably typically less. So now what do? Your skin's irritated, you do your best and try and go back again later when you change your bag. Or, I don't know. That seems like that adds even another layer to it.
Yeah, I don't know what I would do if I had a leak during a situation like that. I think I would probably try Robin's trick and just seal it with the paste without changing the bag. And then just like make sure that I didn't leak on my clothes and then deal with it later.
Cause some sort of major like disruption in the trial. And then maybe it gets called for the day. I don't know. This is bomb threat.
I feel like
a good old bomb threat is always good.
I feel like I should be able to say like, I'm having a medical situation and people should respect that. Like, just like if someone who had diabetes had low sugar, they should be able to say, I'm having a medical situation and there should be no questions asked. I don't think the world is that kind. So I don't know that that would actually work. But that's how I think the world could be more accessible, is if I say, hey, I have a medical thing, we need to wrap it up, or this is done for today. And there was no questions asked, no rolling of the eyes. People respected that.
I feel like the legal profession in particular is not very kind.
Yeah.
Sorry. My brother and sister-in-law are both lawyers. I love you guys, but listen, I think they've told me some stories about how like the legal profession isn't exactly known for its empathy, perhaps, I think.
Yeah. I've asked myself that. Why did you choose a profession that prides themselves on hostility? And I haven't been able to answer that question yet. But
I will say it is a bit surprising because you're a genuinely nice person. So I don't know. Maybe you really like to debate.
No, I don't. And, I cry a lot when people are mean to me. So it's really, I think advocacy is important to me, and that's what I like to do. I do not like to argue with people. I do not like when people are rude. I'm very sensitive about it. So
it's funny you say that, because that was one thing I said to Robin, is that I was going to ask you a curiosity question of whether you ever would consider parlaying your legal career into more of an advocacy, like legislative advocacy type of a career.
I thought about it. I feel like I need the experience of what it's actually like in the trenches before I could create policy, which I do feel like I've been in the trenches of chronic illness for a long time. And I feel like I have a lot of opinions based on personal experience. But I think policy would be really hard for me because it would be so personal to me. Mm. And it's hard enough for me to like have a client with a bathroom situation. Like, to me, that's very personal, and I take it very seriously. And I don't know, I think if somebody wasn't interested in creating accessible bathrooms, or if someone wasn't interested in getting rid of step therapy, I don't know how I would have a conversation with that person. I don't know that I'm mature enough to deal with that.
I don't know that some of our current legislators are mature enough to have that conversation.
That's fair.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make it political, but I've been watching some C-SPAN lately. So
yeah, no, I'm definitely would be interested in policy. And I think I'd be interested in specifically accessibility policy and making ostomy supplies more affordable.
Sure. Yeah.
And bathrooms.
Yeah.
I'd be interested in a lot.
Well, don't worry. We're going to start working on your campaign, and
thank you.
We'll work on our campaign. We'll start, workshopping our ideas for better ostomy supplies. I feel like we've got something going here. We just need a name for our business. Really is how this goes.
I think I would love to be in an office, but I don't know if people could handle like all the poop talk that I like talk, the openness about ostomies and bathrooms and things like that. I think it would turn a lot of people off.
Nah.
No, my very good friend who started out as a coworker, she jokes all the time about how much I talked about poop previously. So not necessarily like at work talking about poop all the time, but there was a lot of poop talk because I had a column at the newspaper, a weekly column that I talked about IBD. So I am not a journalist. So if anybody goes and Googles this column, by the way, I was just a regular person working in the advertising department, sharing my experience and other people's experience. So this was was not like cutting edge journalism. So
I mean,
please
I was
don't
about to say,
Google.
Robin, I feel like we know each other pretty well, and I did not know you had this. This is the first time you've brought this up, and I'm mad at you about that.
I'm so sorry. I'm
Listen.
so sorry. Again,
This
do
is-
not Google.
Oh, we're
I'm gonna
Googling.
Google it as soon as we stop talking.
Oh yeah.
I can't wait to
I was
read
like,
about
I think
this.
Hannah's Googling it now.
Anyway, my point of that was there was a lot of poop talk and I didn't really know them that well. And it was okay that there was poop talk.
I'm a big believer in like a support system is non-negotiable. I could not have survived the past 6 months without a support system. And the support system has to be willing to talk about and joke about the ostomy supplies and the bathroom and the leaks and all the fun things that come along with this.
Yes.
Yeah.
The joking is important.
Well, and
The
that's the
joking
one
is
thing I
very
think
important.
that we've learned from our time in the IBD community, me on one side and Robin on the, not chosen side, sorry, is just the importance of sharing your story and hearing other people's stories. Like that simple act of saying like, this is this thing and this is what I've been through makes all these people come out of the woodwork and say, oh my God, me too. And how powerful that is to have this community around you, how powerful it is to hear other people say, yeah, I get it. Like this is shitty, no pun intended.
Yeah, I think that's the best part. And everybody handles it differently. Like I go on Facebook and Instagram and talk about it. I'm an open book. I love to talk about it. My younger brother has Crohn's disease and he's like, doesn't talk about it. He probably has best friends who don't even know he has Crohn's. Like that's just not how he deals with it. I mean, and he has a great support system also, but everybody takes support in different ways.
Yeah. I think there are some people that need to compartmentalize that away from their quote unquote regular life and just have the folks like maybe you, who he knows really gets it, and your mom, who is a super advocate, and sort of those are the people that get to be in the know. And then everybody else is just, I'm going to go pretend this doesn't exist over there, So I think that's okay. There's no right way to cope with these diseases.
That's right. Everybody does it different.
But it is really impressive. Again, like going back to you sharing on social media, it is impressive that like just by you doing that, how many people come out to say, yeah, I get it. Me too. Or like, I'm so glad you're sharing this. I learned something from you. Listen, I learned about ostomy today, so that's great. I think that's really awesome. Speaking of your brother of Crohn's disease, sorry, I shouldn't laugh. That was inappropriate. Apologies.
It's okay. We laugh about it too.
Okay, good. Was he diagnosed after you, or how close together were you guys diagnosed?
Yeah. So he was diagnosed 4 years later. He was in college. He was having tummy aches and we were texting and I was like, I think you should get it checked out because I have Crohn's. And so he went to the GI and in where he was at college. And as soon as he filled out the form that said he had a family history and that it was his sister who had Crohn's, they scheduled a colonoscopy like that day. So he had a much different diagnosis experience. And I don't know if it's because it was a family history. I don't know if it was because he was older or because he was a guy, but whatever it was, he got diagnosed pretty immediately from his onset of symptoms. And it was mild. Thank God it was, but I think it had a lot to do with the early diagnosis.
For sure. I definitely think the family history plays into it.
Yeah, I think there was a lot that played into it. The other thing was like on top of having a family history, a part of having the family history is like when I got diagnosed, I have a second cousin with Crohn's, but we're not like that, like in consanguinity or however you say it, we're not that closely related.
Right.
So there was really no one in my household who was like, oh, this is Crohn's. Versus for my brother, there was people in the household who were like, oh, this is what Hannah has. So there was more of an awareness of what to look for and what things were not normal and what things were maybe normal.
And we've had other guests that have talked about that too, or people that I've talked to that are like, oh yeah, because of my, I think actually when our guest Caroline that it was on recently, she talked about how her sister was diagnosed after she was diagnosed, but like because her parents were basically hyper vigilant about saying, okay, you have a stomach ache. Oh, we're taking you to the doctor, instead of just saying, here's some Tums, deal with it.
Yeah, I think that plays into a lot of it. I think I've heard a lot of people that I know that have IBD, it takes a year or a couple years to get diagnosed. Like, I think that's a very common thread of IBD. But then when you have a family member or a loved one or a friend with IBD, it happens quicker because there's either more of awareness or because of the genetics.
That's true.
And I think you seek medical attention much faster because I think I know I go, oh, I can just deal with this. I'm sure I just ate bad shellfish or whatever it was, and you sort of pass it off as something that's not a big deal. But if you know what you're looking at, you know what you're looking for, and you are aware, then you're going to be much quicker to go to the doctor and advocate for yourself a lot faster. And I think that's one of my passion points, is really that idea of being a good advocate for yourself, like teaching patients how to go in and be like, I'm not going to take your shit. And like, I'm going to push for what I need. I'm going to push for the drug I want. I'm going to, push for the tests that I think are necessary, because there are, especially with our insurance system, they try to not give you the services if they can possibly not pay for them, so pushing to get your blood work to see if you're deficient in vitamins and minerals and things like that. That's maybe not normal.
Yeah, I think that's been a big part of, I'm so traumatized from the whole six months ago that I go to the ER like every other week or every 3 weeks, like anytime I have a symptom. And I know that's not normal, but like I show up, I show my ileostomy. I'm like, I have an ileostomy and I have this symptom. They triage me immediately. I know all the staff there now. And, most of the time it's like, you're dehydrated. Here's a bag of saline, go home. But one time they caught the thing on my ovary. So that was a blessing, but I've learned to listen to my body. I'm probably listening too closely because of how often I'm going, but hopefully I'll find a middle ground. But I think that is definitely something I've been paying attention to more after having so many complications.
You will find the middle ground. You definitely will, but it does take a lot of hypervigilance. I don't even know if I said this. Recently, I had to get an iron infusion, and in December, my hair started falling out, and I know that that's a sign that my iron is dropping. So I reached out to my doctor and I said, look, my hair is falling out. We need to do labs. And so she did, without question. She ordered labs, and sure enough, my iron was dropping. So I had to get an iron infusion. But if I didn't go through that period of hypervigilance of like every little twinge, like what is that? How does it feel? What is it doing? What does it mean? I wouldn't know that, okay, my hair is falling out. Because everybody loses hair when they brush the hair in the shower or whatever. But for me, there's a threshold. Like I know this many hairs, that means my iron's dropping. So you will find that the middle ground. It'll take you a little while to get there, but this period of hypervigilance is really going to help you get there. And if you decide to keep the ostomy or decide to reverse the ostomy, it will help you even more so once you've made that, decision to move forward too, because everybody should listen to their body more. Your body keeps score. There's a book. It does. It definitely does.
Yeah. And I think even though I'm not a doctor, and I think every IBD patient would agree with this, it's that like, your body better than the doctor. Like,
Sure.
what this symptom means, what this symptom doesn't mean. Of course, I'm not saying I could read labs like they could, but like nobody knows your body better than you do.
Yeah. What it feels like when your iron is too low, what it feels like when something's wrong with your ostomy, and I 100% agree with you. What I find a little bit heartbreaking is just the mental capacity that it takes to live with a chronic illness, because not only are you dealing with the insurance craziness and making sure you have the right ostomy supplies and contemplating where the bathroom is, but you're also going, okay, what does this twinge mean? And what does this mean? And what does that mean? The sort of hypervigilance that goes along with it is really, it just makes me think like, gosh, that's really adding a whole nother layer to your life that most people probably, don't have to deal with if they don't have a chronic illness.
Yeah, I think it's very paralyzing. I think that I know it will get better because this was not my first surgery. Like, same thing with my bowel resection 7 years ago. It was very paralyzing afterwards. And then eventually you're closer to being away from the surgery than you were to the surgery. But as you're kind of recovering physically and emotionally from the surgery, it's very paralyzing. And it really is a full-time job because like, with the insurance and getting supplies and figuring out what works and dealing with your mental health, it's a full-time job on top of whatever you do to pay for those things as your actual job.
Right. And then add in, boyfriends and dogs and families and all of the other obligations that you have, good obligations, not bad obligations, obviously, but good obligations, it does become, it's a lot. I mean, poor Robin has to in addition to dealing with all that, she has to are we going to podcast? When are we going to podcast? All that sort of stuff. So we added a whole new layer into your life, Robin. You're welcome.
Yay. It's okay because I was thinking, thank you. I was thinking on my drive today, I had a 7-hour drive today, that I feel as normal as I have felt in a very long time, like since my surgery. Like I'm really starting to feel like myself again. And this is Hannah's show today, but I did want to share that they found something on my last scope, my last pouchoscopy, my first pouchoscopy, my last scope. And so I have to go in and have a resection, and it is they're just going to do it endoscopically. I don't have to go in to like have surgery, so I'm very happy about that. But talking to you today just really got me thinking about that, like feeling back to normal, going in 2 weeks and having this procedure again. I could end up with they could go in and say, we can't fix this endoscopically, and you already have a J pouch and there's nothing we can do. So I'm so glad that you're our guest today, because it really got me thinking about like that's okay. Like if I have to have an ostomy and that's just what it is, then that's okay. I totally just derailed our conversation, but it really got me thinking about it. It got me thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you wake up with an ostomy, and actually I remember the first time I was ever hospitalized, so I was 17 was the first time I got admitted, and I was like 2 months after my diagnosis, and I was terrified. And you go into the ER, you do a CT scan, and then they came back in and said, she has whatever it was, I can't even remember, but we need to admit her for a few days. And I'd never been admitted to the hospital. And I just put my head under the sheet and started crying because I was so scared. And my mom, took the sheet off and was like, you can have 5 minutes to be sad, and then you need to start, we deal with this. And at the time I thought it was so rude, but looking back on it, I think it really changed the way I've dealt with this disease. And so, I feel like if you wake up with an ostomy or whatever you wake up with from the surgery, you can be upset and you can be shocked and you can be devastated, or you can be happy, and whatever it is, you will have that. And then whether it's 5 minutes or 5 days or whatever, then you'll get up and deal with it. And,
Right.
You'll order the supplies, whatever it is you have to do, you have to give yourself those 5 minutes or 5 days to feel it. And then you go through it.
Okay, I have to just tell you that I love your mom right now, because I say the exact same thing to my daughters, like literally the exact same thing. Pick an amount of time to feel all of your feelings about whatever this is, and then we're going to deal with it and move on. So I'm so glad I'm not the only mom that tells her daughters that, but also it's a good reminder. It is a good reminder that that's exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to have my 5 minutes and then I'll just deal with it like everything else that IBD has thrown at us, right?
But the nice reminder to that is that feel the feeling. Don't bury it.
Right.
Don't dig it down.
That's right.
Feel the feeling, work through the feeling, and then move to the coping and
Yes.
problem solving stage. But, because
Yes.
I'm from the Midwest, where we just bury our feelings deep down inside and let them just, get real nasty down there. So, but that's part of grief, is that there's stages of grief that go along with these things, like waking up with an ostomy and not expecting it, like being diagnosed with a chronic illness. And you have to make sure that you understand that that's what this is and work through it. And, because otherwise you're going to end up angry or not dealing. And that's not the way you live your life.
No.
I think that IBD grief also is in a circle, because, I think for the most part, I actually don't even know that the order that the things go in, but I know that for me, it's not linear, that there's sometimes anger, and there's sometimes sadness, and there's sometimes acceptance, there's sometimes bargaining. And then, sometimes I'm like, okay, I've accepted this. Like, I love the ostomy. And then, sure enough, 5 minutes later it leaks and I'm like, F this thing. So, I think that grief is just so circular and not linear, but you have to feel it, and that's the only way you're gonna survive.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's okay to be mad. I'd be mad if I was like in the middle of something and my ostomy leaked and God damn it, now I have to go deal with this. Of course you're going to be mad at that. You're not going to be like, well, this is just life with an ostomy. Maybe you will, maybe you'll have a day where you're just like, whatever, but probably not. Like, be mad at that. That's okay.
Yeah, I think I'm not the type of person that's gonna be like, oh, this is just so peachy, I'm so happy for the leak.
No, yeah, I was never happy. I never took a leak with a grain of salt. I was like, so mad.
That's okay.
Yeah,
but feel the feelings. Okay. That's the moral of that.
Yeah.
And I have therapy tomorrow, so I'll have her walk me through it too. So
yeah, that's another thing, is I realize the importance of therapy. And I know that therapy doesn't work for everyone, but I think that if you find a coping mechanism that works for you, you got to use it, because otherwise you're just not going to be able to get through. I don't know really what I'm going with that. But
no, I agree with you. I think you're right. Not everybody is our therapy people, even though Robin and I are huge proponents of therapy on this show. It's not for everybody. I think having a therapist in like the acute moments, like you wake up with an ostomy and you really need to like come up with some coping skills real fast, or you're just diagnosed and you need somebody to kind of help you deal with those coping skills again real fast. Sure, definitely work with a therapist. But I think, there's other people that being out in nature and, and going on hikes and being able to do that stuff is what really helps them, or being around children or whatever it is. And so like, but you're right, figure out what that is and then make sure you are giving space for that, when you're living your life.
I think it's also worth noting that like with IBD, where there's so many different layers to IBD, that the coping skills change. Like I've had the same therapist since I was diagnosed with Crohn's in 2010, and she helped me cope with the anger of having a chronic illness. And then she helped me cope with, how do I manage my stress so that way my disease I don't flare. Now that I have an ostomy, none of the coping skills applied to having a medical device. So now I've been talking to the same woman who is amazing for more than 10 years, but now we're talking about way different ways to cope. And I think that's like something worth noting for IBD patients, because, sometimes there'll be a biologic, sometimes you'll be an infusion or hospitalization, but it's like the coping skills have to change as the disease changes.
And life circumstances. Yes. I mean, also, you're going to school, you're not going to school, you've got a partner, you don't have a partner. Like I think it's just that it's going to change depending on where you are at as well.
Even though I'm a huge proponent of therapy, I really didn't seek out a therapist until after this last surgery, when I started having panic attacks because of fear of having to have another surgery and fear of having these procedures. And I had always been able to do things like walk in nature or meditate or, all of these other coping mechanisms that I had developed over the years. But this was a new thing because of the surgery and the multi-organ failure and the sepsis and all of that other stuff that I went through, where I was having legitimate panic attacks, and none of my coping mechanisms, just like you just said, none of my coping mechanisms worked. And I had to seek out assistance to figure out how I was going to get through this and be able to feel my panic attacks, but then get myself out of them, because I wasn't able to get myself out of them. So that's exactly right. You have to, all of these new things that IBD throws at you may require new or different coping mechanisms, but you do, right? Yeah. You cope.
But I also think, like normalizing panic attacks, like that feels like that's normal for people who have an illness that is unpredictable.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that there's such a stigma against panic attacks, but like, if you have a surgery and you go septic, I can tell you as someone who went septic, you feel like you're dying, and you might think you actually are dying. And so like, why wouldn't you have a panic attack about that? Why wouldn't you have some trauma from that? I mean, that is not a normal thing to experience and then survive and then stand up and talk about. I mean, how amazing is that? But imagine, like, your mind has to heal after going through that.
Right. And then of course that's going to add a layer of being afraid of having to have other surgeries, or, being afraid of going back to the hospital where you became septic and where you had to spend so much time. Yes, that is trauma. That is trauma.
Yeah, it's 100%. I don't know if I shared this with you, Alicia. I actually, and I don't know if you felt this way, Hannah, but after my surgery and everything that happened, they had me on a lot of medication. So I wasn't always coherent, I guess is the best way. I mean, I was awake, but not as aware as I could have been. But as soon as that awareness came back, like I had this feeling of, I have got to get out of this hospital. Like, if I don't get out of this hospital, I'm going to die in this hospital. Like, it wasn't necessarily anything that was rational, maybe, but I had this overwhelming sense of, I have to get out of here. And I must realize that, because at one point they called my husband and said, your wife is trying to like leave the hospital. And he said, no, she's not. She is not trying to check herself out, which I wasn't aware of it at all, but I did. So I must have been very vocal about my feelings of like, if I don't get out of here, I might not make it. But I did work towards like asking every specialist that came in to see me, like, what are the milestones that I have to hit for you to release me? And I started like making those milestones happen. I probably shouldn't have been released from the hospital when I was. I mean, I don't know. I like willed myself to be able to get to the point to be able to release. I mean, when I got home,
I'm sorry to laugh at that, Robin, but it's such a Robin thing to be like, oh, I'm hitting these milestones and I'm getting out.
I had walked to the bathroom and back to my bed, and I asked them what the PT person, what the milestone was, and they said, you have to walk around this whole floor unassisted. I had not walked more than 10 steps at a time. and I walked around the whole floor unassisted on my first time to get out of there.
I had a completely opposite trauma response because I was home when I went septic, and I was like, I go back to the ER, they tell me I'm septic, and then I was afraid to go home because at home is where I didn't have doctors taking my vitals, and I didn't have access to a CT scan if there was an emergency. And so I was afraid to go home. And, at one point I had some drains put in, and at one point they said, you could go home with the drains. You're probably ready to go home. And I was like, no, I'm not going home with the drain, because if there is the slightest color of pink, I'm going to think it's infected. Please don't do that. And then they pulled the drain out, and then they said, okay, you're ready to go home. And I thought, I was just afraid to go home. And so I said, can I stay? And the surgeon said, you're going to have to get your mail here if you don't go home soon. And so we negotiated, and I was like, can I have 24 hours without now that I'm off the drains and I'm off the IV meds, can I have 24 hours? And if I go 24 hours without an emergency, then I'll agree to go home. You won't have to have me escorted out. And so we did that, but I was just the total opposite. And I can see where you're coming from, where you're like, I want to go home. But for me, home, and it was a warm space. It was my parents' house. They were taking care of me. My brother was taking care of me. My boyfriend was there too. But I was terrified to be away from doctors and nurses who I could just press the emergency button and already be there.
That makes total sense.
I'm sitting over here laughing to myself because not only did I go home with a drain because of an abscess, I had to have over 2 weeks of IV antibiotics at home.
Why did they let you out?
Like,
why let you out?
When my
Did you
sister,
discharge yourself?
That's right. When my sister, who is a nurse 20 years, who's worked in ICU before and the emergency room, she met me at my house. When I walked in, she didn't tell me this at the time. She told me later. The first thing she thought when she saw me was, they should not have let you come home. But I had hit all the milestones that they told me I had to hit, right? So I was like going home, but she administered IV for me while she was in town. And I still had a drain, and so complete opposite reactions. Opposite.
I also think that me going to the ER every couple of weeks is a trauma response, because I'm like, just get me access to a doctor. Like I'm not, my partner's not a doctor. So therefore I need to be at the ER as much as possible to have access to a nurse and a doctor and all that.
Maybe you could convince your partner to go to medical school or like nursing school, or just like be like, hey, consider a career change.
I'm thinking about it. I think I would probably drive him crazy though, because I would be like wanting exams all the time, because I feel like I've become I think it's hypervigilance. And I'm really glad that you said that, Robin, because that's so validating, because I was starting to feel like a hypochondriac, which I totally own, because if that's what it is, I don't care. But I think hypervigilant is a much better way to describe that, of what I'm feeling.
Yes, it will definitely serve you. So you can see, I feel things, and medical professionals are like, do you really? And I'm like, yeah, I really do. And then they do whatever they do to check, and they're like, oh yeah, it's there.
Which must be like validating, but also infuriating all at the same time. You're like, maybe just listen to me, assholes. Come on.
So one of the times that I went to the ER, I wrote on a piece of paper, like, this is what I have. This is my diagnosis. These are the surgeries I've had. This is what works. This is what doesn't. This is why I'm here. And I handed it to the doctor, and I'm sure he didn't like it, because I was basically telling him, here's what you need to prescribe me, and here's what tests you need to run. But it was kind of empowering, because I didn't have to explain myself, because at least, I'm sure he was rolling his eyes when he read it, but at least we didn't have to do it verbally and have an altercation in the waiting room. He just read it and was like, okay, that's what this patient is.
I actually had an experience recently where I had to get a new primary care, and I live in a really small town now. And so I got an appointment at the local doctor's office, and I was expecting to go in there and have like an older gentleman. Like, I usually don't like to see male doctors anymore. I'm sorry, guys. My personal experience anyway. But that was my only option in this small town. So I went in to see him, and I'm just waiting for this old guy to walk in who doesn't know anything about Crohn's disease, and, is a young guy walked in, and I visibly relaxed. I almost said, oh, thank God, out loud, because at least he was younger and potentially open. And as soon as I sat down and started talking to him, he was actually asking me questions. He's like, I don't know a lot about this. I'm excited to have you as a patient so that I can learn and you can explain, and we can, so it was a very good experience that I appreciated. But having doctors not take you at your word or roll their eyes at you, or when when you're trying to explain to them what's happening and they're telling you, no, that's not what's happening. It's a very frustrating experience.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating. In addition to the pain, like the physical pain you're feeling, it's very frustrating. It's the last thing you want to deal with.
You feel really terrible. And then like nobody's taking you seriously. And you're like, God, I'm just going to burn this place down.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm bomb threats burning down. I promise I'm not a terrorist, guys.
Alicia.
I know. And I'm not the one drinking bourbon.
I know.
All right. Well, Hannah, sadly, our time with you is getting close to its end, but I feel like we could talk to you forever. Last question for you. If you had one piece of advice to give our community, what would it be?
I think the one piece of advice would be trust your instinct, trust your body, trust what your gut is telling you. Not really, no pun intended, like trust your mental gut. When you think something's off, something's probably off.
Good advice.
The other thing I was going to say is it gets better. Like every day gets better. There are some bad days, but it always gets better.
I would agree with that.
Well, Hannah, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure. And I hope that we can have you back again someday to join us and give us more pearls of wisdom and tell us more about what's going on with your life. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
If you liked Hannah's episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends. Thanks.